The first committee of the 80th session of the General Assembly is called to order. Distinguished delegates, the committee would recall that it heard the last speaker in the general debate this morning. Members would further recall that the committee on international The 10th meeting of the Disarmament and International Security Committee, first committee of the 80th session of the General Assembly is called to order. Distinguished delegates, the committee would recall that it heard the last speaker in the general debate this morning. Members would further recall that at its 5th meeting on 13 October, the committee decided to begin listening to statements today under the nuclear weapons cluster in the thematic discussion, should the need arise. This change to the program of work is without prejudice to the schedule of panels and briefings set out in document A/C1/80/CRP2. Distinguished delegates, in accordance with the committee's decision at its organizational meeting that at least 1.5 hours of the general debate be devoted to statements by civil society, the committee will now listen to statements by the representatives of NGOs. I extend a warm welcome to all present today, and I would request all speakers to kindly make their statements short and no longer than 3.5 minutes. In keeping with the committee's established practice, I will now suspend the meeting to enable us to continue in an informal setting. The meeting is suspended. The first speaker on the list is Ms. Pia Devoto, representative of the GENSAC. Please, you have the floor.
Usted y a su equipo por el trabajo.
I thank your team for their work. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Action Network on Small Arms. That is a global network of organizations that work to reduce the human cost of armed violence. During the 4th review conference on the United Nations Action Plan to prevent, combat, eradicate the illicit trafficking of small arms and light weapons held in June of 2024 and in the meeting of the First Committee of the General Assembly number 79 of that year, states demonstrated that they remain gravely concerned by the persistent effects of the illicit trade in and very scant control of the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Preoccupations embrace the whole life cycle: manufacturing, stockpiling, transfer, brokerage, danger of diversion, and the problems related to their end use. There is also concern about the complete elimination of obsolete weapons and munitions. The illicit trade in and the proliferation of small arms and light weapons continue to exacerbate and fuel armed violence and conflict, and has a wide range of humanitarian and socioeconomic consequences. They undermine compliance both with international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and impede the provision of humanitarian assistance to those affected by armed violence. We wish to take this opportunity to urge states to adopt the necessary measures to implement instruments, treaties, and global conventions, as well as the regional conventions on arms control and the regulation of their trade, that is, agreements into which they have entered. If these instruments were effectively implemented, they could resolve the problems arising from small arms and light weapons. We are referring, of course, to the United Nations Plan of Action, the International Tracing Instrument, the UN Protocol on Firearms, and the Arms Trade Treaty. These instruments are also complemented, of course, by regional instruments and by sub-regional instruments. Moreover, in December of 2023, states agreed upon the global framework for the through-life conventional ammunition management, including small arms and light weapons munitions. The effective implementation of the global framework would reduce unenvisaged explosions and would improve security and stockpile management, and that would save hundreds of lives. We encourage states to reaffirm their commitment to actively engaging with civil society and to adopt a comprehensive approach to implementation. one that promotes the equal, full, meaningful and effective participation of women in arms and ammunition control processes and ensures the full inclusion of underrepresented groups and individuals, including young people, gender diverse persons, victims and survivors. It is our hope that this meeting will consider the next steps to take in enhancing the effective implementation of these instruments. We encourage you, Chair, to critically consider the pace of technological advances in arms manufacturing and their impact on arms control and transfer regulation. Anticipating and addressing the pace of these technological developments and taking decisions. The microphone has been cut off.
I thank the distinguished representative of GENSAC. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of PAX.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Chair, distinguished delegates, I am delivering this statement on behalf of 19 civil society organizations. Across today's battlefields and beyond, the skies have become theatres of fear. Armed drones are deployed by state and non-state actors alike, not only as tactical tools of war, but increasingly as weapons of terror against civilians. Yet little is done to prevent their misuse, as evidenced by notorious developments since last year's First Committee. In July 2025 alone, Russia launched over 6,000 Shahed drones into Ukraine, killing civilians and destroying residential areas. In Sudan, drone strikes have targeted displacement camps and critical infrastructure, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. In Gaza, drones have been used to drop grenades on civilians, including children. And even outside of active battlefields, such as in Ethiopia, Somalia, Syria, or in Latin America, extrajudicial drone killings persist, resulting in civilian deaths with impunity. Drone attacks by non-state actors with resulting civilian deaths or injuries also remain a serious concern, particularly in Central Africa, Colombia and Haiti. These are not isolated incidents, they are signs of the failure of the international community to govern armed violence and to prevent the erosion of international norms. Even worse, dual-use technologies and commercial components are being weaponized with ease. Civilian and military drone technologies are blending, further obscuring lines of accountability and control. Chair, despite years of concerns being raised by civil society, subject matters, experts and UN bodies, the world still lacks an international framework for the regulation of armed drones, and it's civilians who pay the price. We therefore urge member states to firstly condemn the use of drones for extrajudicial killings or as a means to terrorize civilians and reaffirm international legal frameworks that prohibit such practices. Second, investigate with transparency any civilian harm from drone deployment and ensure victims access to justice. And third, strengthen export control regimes for armed drones transfers and use. Chair, during last year's First Committee, we welcomed renewed momentum from the core group of states calling for dedicated multilateral discussions on armed drones. But these calls must be turned into concrete action. We call on states to initiate an inclusive policy process that delivers clear, robust and binding international standards on armed drones. This issue requires a truly multilateral response in collaboration with civil society, academics and survivors. We urge member states to rise to the urgency of this moment and take decisive action to curb rampant drone violence, safeguarding civilians and bolstering international peace and security. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the representative of PAX for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Stop Killer Robots.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of Stop Killer Robots, a coalition of over 270 civil society organizations across more than 70 countries working to counter threats to humanity and human dignity through the adoption of a new international treaty to prohibit and regulate autonomous weapon systems. Autonomous weapon systems, particularly those that do not allow for meaningful human control, and systems that target people, raise serious humanitarian, legal, security, technological, and ethical concerns, with implications for their use during both conflict and peacetime. Despite these serious risks, new weapons and other militarized technologies are being rapidly developed without specific rules to govern their use. After over a decade of multilateral discussions, states must urgently begin negotiations of a legally binding instrument to prohibit and regulate autonomous weapons systems. The quest for speed in the use of force through AI and automation threatens commitments to international humanitarian law, protection of civilians, human rights, and dignity. We are already witnessing the military use of AI decision support systems in current conflicts in Gaza, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, and Yemen, which in some cases have contributed to immense harm. We have also seen increased interest and investment in autonomy in weapons systems by the private sector and concerning new partnerships between the defense and tech sectors. As the gap between development and regulation continues to grow, the international community has an obligation to establish rules for developers and militaries to prevent the unconscionable slide towards machines making life and death decisions. States must heed the repeated calls by the Secretary General and the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross to negotiate a legally binding instrument on autonomous weapons by 2026. These appeals are supported by thousands of technology and AI experts, Nobel laureates, faith leaders, and civil society across the world. The race to regulate autonomous weapons is at a critical juncture, and legal red lines have never been more urgent. The clock is ticking, and time is running out. The Stop Killer Robot campaign welcomes the resolution on autonomous weapons tabled at this first committee and applauds the leadership of states that are continually pushing for progress on this issue. States committed to taking action on autonomous weapons must support this resolution. Stop Killer Robots remains ready to support all states willing to turn the common ground they have developed over the past decade into law. Autonomy in weapons systems raises profound questions about our shared humanity, but it is not a problem that is out of our hands. We have the collective power and responsibility to build a world that is peaceful and just, a world where we make decisions to protect human dignity today and for future generations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Stop Killer Robots for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of King's College, London.
Mr. Chair, the Biological Weapons Convention stands as the world's foundational norm against one of humanity's most abhorrent categories of weapons. Yet half a century after its entry into force, it still lacks a formal verification mechanism. Today, renewed attention to BWC verification, including AI-based approaches, offers both the opportunity to modernize the BWC and the responsibility to do so in a manner that reinforces confidence, cooperation, and collective security. Verification is a tool to build confidence between states, between scientific communities, and between governments and the global public. Advances in science and technology offer new avenues to enhance transparency, detect anomalies, and support compliance monitoring. Properly applied, AI can help identify patterns in life science research and production, improve anomaly detection in data, and assist in analyzing open source information without compromising legitimate research or commercial confidentiality. Yet technological innovation alone cannot substitute for political will. Verification will depend on layered approaches, from robust declarations and transparency initiatives to cooperative consultation and, when necessary, on-site assessment. AI can augment but not replace these essential human and institutional foundations of trust. A recent study on BWC verification from Vertic and King's College London underscores this point. It finds that emerging technologies and disciplines such as microbial forensics, remote sensing, and open source analysis can strengthen off-site monitoring and increase confidence in on-site identification and analysis. However, it also concludes that no single measure can ensure compliance. Thus, renewed attention to verification is welcome. Incremental cooperative steps like practicing consultation and clarification, exercising verification techniques in the field, and building shared understanding of uncertainties can prepare the ground for a future mechanism that is both technically sound and politically feasible. Mr. Chair, AI and other emerging tools must serve the BWC's ultimate objective, preventing the reemergence of biological weapons in any form. This requires that AI systems be developed and used responsibly in accordance with international and national laws, ethical norms, and scientific integrity. States, both collectively through the BWC working group and at the national level, along with civil society, must first define the objectives of a verification mechanism and then determine how best to design available tools to support those objectives in a manner that is financially and politically acceptable. By investing today in verification literacy, responsible innovation, and international collaboration, we can ensure that the BWC remains fit for purpose in an age of rapid technological change. In strengthening verification, we strengthen confidence, and in strengthening confidence, we strengthen peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of King's College London for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Munition Coalition.
Thank you, Chair. The Convention on Cluster Munitions remains the only international framework for the effective eradication of this abhorrent and indiscriminate weapon. It creates a powerful global norm that stigmatizes cluster munitions through the strict prohibition on their use, production, stockpiling, and transfer. The Convention continues to stand strong with 112 states parties and 12 signatories. This year, we welcome Vanuatu as its newest member. We urge all states, particularly those that signed the Convention more than 15 years ago, to complete their ratification and join without further delay ahead of next year's review conference hosted by Laos. Since its entry into force in 2010, the Convention has achieved remarkable progress. States parties have destroyed all cluster munitions once held in their stockpiles, nearly 180 million submunitions, and 11 previously affected countries have cleared all contaminated land. States parties are also implementing strong provisions on risk education and victim assistance. However, these achievements are overshadowed by the ongoing use of cluster munitions and one state's withdrawal from the Convention. According to the Cluster Munition Monitor, cluster munitions continue to be used extensively in Ukraine by both Russia and Ukraine. New use has also been recorded in Myanmar and Syria, and Thailand appeared to have used them during its border conflict with Cambodia this summer. Civilians remain the vast majority of victims, with children disproportionately affected. Given the grave and long-lasting humanitarian consequences these weapons cause, it is deeply disheartening to witness Ukraine's use of cluster munitions enabled by rounds of transfers from the United States last year. All use of cluster munitions by anyone and under any circumstances must be unequivocally condemned and halted immediately, along with any actions that could enable further use, including transfer and production. This year, the Convention faced an absolutely unprecedented and deeply troubling development: Lithuania's decision to withdraw. This withdrawal, which took effect in March, marks the first ever withdrawal from the Humanitarian Disarmament Treaty. The Cluster Munition Coalition condemns this short-sighted decision and urges Lithuania to reconsider and to refrain from acquisition or production of this weapon. We appeal to all states parties to remain steadfastly committed to their obligations. This convention, like others aimed at protecting civilians in armed conflict, must never be treated as a fair-weather commitment. Finally, universalization is more critical than ever. We call on all states still outside the Convention to take immediate steps to join and to enact moratoria on the production, transfer, and use of cluster munitions. As a first and vital step, we urge all states to vote in favor of the annual UN General Assembly resolution on this convention. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Munition Coalition for her statement. I give now the floor to distinguished representative of Access Now.
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate this opportunity to address the committee and raise cybersecurity, peace, and human security. I deliver on behalf of Access Now, an international organization that provides digital security assistance and defends and extends digital rights. Every day we witness more states join an irrational arms race under the sheen of digital and cyber innovation. This occurs amid the degradation of the humanitarian framework and the threats posed by the increasing use of emerging technologies such as AI, unregulated lethal autonomous weapons, and spyware. We recalled last year the advances in machine learning that led to a boom in AI enthusiasm and investments. Despite our calls for enforceable human rights-based legal instruments, energy and resources went to fuel AI hype and defense-oriented tech. Investments into defense tech startups grew, while the humanitarian and human rights sector are starved of funding, impacting the dignity of millions. Even the traditionally cautious big tech community does not hesitate to feature children's toys and lethal autonomous weapon systems next to each other in their AI portfolios. We emphasize the need to address the militarization of commercial tech. The first committee made strides on AI use in military domains and must press forward to protect civilians from these encroaching tools in coordination with civil society. But discussions on cyber warfare often fail to reflect how to ensure processes that reestablish peace and human security when hostilities cease also extend to the digital dimension of people's lives. What we need to define as a digital ceasefire is a new mental and operational model to ensure the protection of peacemakers and negotiators from cyber threats. On the cybersecurity front, tools for surveillance proliferate, powered by the commercial cyber intrusion sector. Those negotiating ceasefires have been targeted, as well as journalists covering conflicts. We welcome the Security Council's ARIA formula meeting on commercial spyware earlier this year, whose findings this committee should build on. Access Now further welcomes the consensus conclusion of the open-ended working group on ICT security and the work of its chair, Ambassador Gafour. We note that Singapore will table a draft resolution in the first committee to endorse the OUWG's final report. And we welcome both the intended new global mechanism and the OEWG's final annual progress report, with its note on the dangers posed by commercial cyber intrusion marketplaces, and its call for mitigation efforts by states to create standards and take action on spyware. However, I must emphasize that this institutional transition to the permanent mechanism, while necessary, must be more than procedural. We need a commitment for permanent, accountable multilateral structures with inbuilt stakeholder participation for cyber governance. Time-limited deliberations are inadequate to the speed and scale of the threats. We call for the global mechanism and the cooperation and capacity building portal to prioritize meaningful civil society participation, robust accountability mechanisms that hold states responsible, and human rights-centered approaches to digital security. Finally, this transition presents an opportunity to embed permanent oversight mechanisms into global governance of cyberspace. And these mechanisms can ensure that international law and agreed normative frameworks are not merely aspirational statements in conference rooms, but
I thank the representative of Access Now for his statement. Give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Disability Rights and Disarmament Initiative.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, last October I had the honor of delivering the first statement on disability and disarmament during the civil society segment of this committee. Our diverse coalition welcomed the opening then of a new chapter of common cause between the international disability and disarmament communities. Since then, our coalition has grown, but so too has the already intolerable level of death, suffering, and trauma experienced by persons with disabilities in armed conflict. So this year, we reiterate our call for explicit disability rights language to be included in many of the existing First Committee resolutions, and we call for a new resolution on disability, disarmament, and non-proliferation. The First Committee alone is uniquely qualified to consider disability in relation to disarmament. Our coalition emphasizes that the First Committee should, indeed must, take up this issue. It is not enough to leave it to other bodies and institutions. Doing so would help in moving this committee into overdue alignment with the obligations set out in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, adopted nearly 20 years ago, negotiated in this very room, now universally signed, and to which all but one state belongs. Even at a time of dangerous global divisions, disability rights can act as a bridge between issues, states, and regions. Indeed, it has in many times in the past. The UN's own Disability Inclusion Strategy and the Pact for the Future clarify that the rights set out in the UN Disability Convention must be respected and applied across the UN system, including in the work of this committee. We have a platform on which to build. The UN Security Council Resolution 2475 established the protection of persons with disabilities in armed conflict as a matter of core concern and clearly related to the work of this committee. Now, to a limited extent, disability issues are minimally or implicitly addressed in First Committee resolutions related to women, peace, and security and youth, peace, and security. But as the CRPD exists to make clear, disability rights are not a subset of other rights. They are rights in their own right, and they deserve explicit, not implicit recognition. Delegates, disarmament is integral to restoring dignity to all persons. Persons with disabilities are integral to all national, regional, and international disarmament processes and efforts. We urge delegations to end the virtual invisibility of disability in the First Committee's crucial work by underscoring the importance of disability rights in their statements, revising all relevant existing resolutions to include language on disability, and finally, supporting a new resolution dedicated to this topic to align with UN Security Council Resolution 2475. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Disability Rights and Disarmament Initiative for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of INU.
Thank you, Chair. It is my pleasure to deliver this statement on behalf of the International Network on Explosive Weapons, a global network of civil society organizations that calls for strengthened action to prevent human suffering from the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, a leading cause of harm to civilians in armed conflict. Explosive weapons kill and injure tens of thousands of civilians each year. They destroy critical civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals, schools, and power and water systems, which impacts the provision of essential services and leads to long-term civilian suffering. In towns and cities across the world today, civilians continue to bear the brunt of bombing and shelling. This suffering is widespread and severe and has reached unprecedented levels in recent years. In 2024, civilian deaths caused by the use of explosive weapons remained staggeringly high in Gaza, while in the rest of the world, they rose by more than half compared to the previous year, driven by conflict in Lebanon, Myanmar, Syria, and Ukraine. Attacks with explosive weapons on civilian infrastructure also rose sharply in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Yemen, and elsewhere. The use of explosive weapons in attacks on healthcare alone increased by 64%, damaging and destroying health facilities and killing health workers. While these impacts on civilians are devastating, they are also foreseeable. Most importantly, they are preventable. The political declaration on strengthening the protection of civilians from the humanitarian consequences of the use of explosive weapons in populated areas has now been endorsed by 89 states and territories. By endorsing the declaration, states commit to avoid civilian harm by restricting or refraining from the use of explosive weapons in populated areas and reviewing existing policies and practices relevant to the protection of civilians. In November 2025, the second International Review Conference will be held in San Jose, Costa Rica, to review and advance implementation efforts and set a roadmap for action for the work ahead. States should come prepared to share progress towards implementing the declaration's commitments and to continue to publicly acknowledge and call for action to address civilian harm from the use of explosive weapons. Endorsing states can also take action and call on parties to conflict to stop the bombardment of towns and cities. To that end, states can use diplomatic means and influence to call on states to endorse the political declaration and implement its commitments, to stop the use of heavy explosive weapons in populated areas, to provide, facilitate, or support assistance to victims, and to facilitate the work of the UN, the ICRC, and civil society organizations aimed at protecting and assisting civilian populations. INU stands ready to support these efforts. Thank you.
I thank the representative of INU for her statement. Give now the floor to distinguished representative of International League for Peace and Freedom. Sorry, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Sorry.
I'm delivering this statement on behalf of the 23 organisations that have signed on. Interest in the topic of gender and disarmament has gathered momentum in recent years at the UN, but most statements, working papers and resolutions do not take an intersectional or non-binary approach to the gendered impacts of weapons, to diversifying delegations, or to studying the implications of gender norms on weapons and war. A global backlash means that women's liberation, LGBTQ+ rights and participation, and gender diversity are under extreme threat. The UN must be a place to uphold human rights and work for the freedom and equality of all people. At last year's First Committee, 33.8% of resolutions included gender references, and 80 delegations endorsed a joint statement on gender and disarmament. Several disarmament treaties have gender focal points, including the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Mine Ban Treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and most recently, the Arms Trade Treaty. States and civil society have made the effort to mainstream gender into work on small arms and light weapons, outer space, chemical weapons, cyber issues, and more. These developments are very welcome and should be continued and enhanced in as many disarmament fora as possible. However, a more robust reflection on the gendered norms associated with weapons, war, and violence is also crucial for addressing the challenges associated with the proliferation and use of those weapons. Weapons are typically seen as important for security and power, while disarmament is treated as something that makes countries weaker or more vulnerable. This has implications for policies related to all weapons, from nuclear bombs to small arms. It is also reflected in the patriarchal approach to security that we've heard in this room, including the defence of genocide and military invasions. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. A key demand of the feminist peace builders behind Resolution 1325 was to stop war altogether, not make it safer for women. Empty condemnation of attacks against civilians while continuing to arm violence against them is unacceptable. As we confront record levels of armed conflict, militarization, and military spending, states must stop arms transfers that violate international law and reduce their military spending, redirecting toward providing for people and planet. An intersectional approach to disarmament that recognises the importance of diverse identities and experiences is also essential. Diversity can help illuminate the various ways in which weapons have gendered, racialised, disability-related and other impacts on communities and peoples. Hopefully, the new UN panel of experts to study the physical and social effects of nuclear war, established on the basis of last year's First Committee resolution, will advance some of these considerations in relation to nuclear weapons. The UN Secretary-General's new Agenda for Peace, released in July 2023, calls for dismantling, quote, the patriarchy and oppressive power structures, unquote, and encourages government, society, and the United Nations to, quote, fight back and take concrete action to challenge and transform gender norms, value systems, and institutional structures that perpetuate exclusion or the status quo, unquote. This is...
I thank the representative of WILPF for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Harvard Law School's International Human Rights Clinic.
Thank you, Chair. I am pleased to deliver this joint statement on behalf of nearly 100 civil society campaigns and organizations. Humanitarian disarmament has made a critical difference for 3 decades in saving countless lives and in setting norms that endure over time. The people-centered approach aims to prevent and remediate arms-inflicted human suffering and environmental harm. Since last year, humanitarian disarmament has faced attacks that have challenged the progress it has made. The use of anti-personnel landmines and cluster munitions and threats of nuclear weapons use highlight the dangers posed by internationally banned weapons. Some states have withdrawn from the Mine Ban Treaty and Convention on Cluster Munitions, further endangering civilians due to the prospect of additional use. The failure of states to fully comply with the Arms Trade Treaty and fully implement the commitments of the Political Declaration on Explosive Weapons have lessened protections for civilians, and progress on a treaty on autonomous weapon systems has not kept pace with technological developments. Nevertheless, while not a panacea, humanitarian disarmament has helped reduce the human cost of weapons for decades and will continue to do so. It has stigmatized and decreased use of certain weapons, reduced stockpiles, and advanced clearance and victim assistance. In the process, it has overcome hurdles such as changing governments, economic turmoil, and the evolving nature of war. The principles of humanitarian disarmament can both sustain this movement and ensure it responds to today's global challenges. These principles include, first, a humanitarian focus. The goal of protecting civilians can transcend political and national differences. Second, a cooperative approach. States should meaningfully involve and work in partnership with each other, civil society, international organizations, and survivors. Third, a commitment to international law. International law, including humanitarian disarmament, creates obligations for states parties and standards that influence actors outside of a treaty. And finally, ability to adapt. Humanitarian disarmament is adaptable, as shown by its move to cover new weapons and new issues. To maximize the influence of humanitarian disarmament and help it address current challenges, we urge states to ensure that the principles I mentioned guide all humanitarian disarmament efforts. To highlight the humanitarian concerns raised by problematic weapons in the course of discussions at First Committee. We urge states to call for upholding existing norms, improving implementation, and creating new or stronger law where appropriate. And finally, to join, fully implement, and comply with humanitarian disarmament instruments. States should push back against the threats to international law and help humanitarian disarmament achieve its full potential. Doing so is in the interest of us all. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Harvard Law School, and for her statement, I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to deliver this joint statement on behalf of 35 civil society organizations. The civilian deaths and devastation caused by the firebombings of Dresden and Tokyo 80 years ago shocked the world. While they were not the first uses of incendiary weapons, the massive scale of the attacks fully demonstrated the horror of these weapons. The conflagrations immediately killed at least 125,000 people in the two cities, left civilian structures and major cultural landmarks in Dresden in ruins, and wiped out whole neighborhoods of wooden homes in Tokyo. Due to the outrage generated by these attacks and developments in international law, particularly CCW Protocol 3, such large-scale strikes with incendiary weapons have not occurred in recent years. These developments underscore the potential power of law and stigma. Protocol 3, however, has not adequately addressed the humanitarian consequences of incendiary weapons, the use of which has been documented in several recent conflicts. The weapons cause excruciating burns, severe scarring, lifelong physical and psychological harm, socioeconomic exclusion, and environmental damage. It's clear that stronger international action is needed. Human Rights Watch research has found, for example, that South Sudan's Air Force killed at least 58 people with improvised incendiary weapons in the Upper Nile State in March 2025. Villages went up in flames, destroying dozens of homes, shops, and other civilian structures. Medical personnel had limited resources to treat the injured. Human Rights Watch also documented Russia's use of quadcopter drones to deliver incendiary weapons onto civilians and civilian objects in Kherson, Ukraine in 2024. One attack destroyed 2 ambulances at an oncology center. Protocol 3 has fallen short due to loopholes in its definition, which excludes multi-purpose munitions, notably those containing white phosphorus, and its regulations, which are weaker for ground-launched incendiary weapons than for air-dropped ones. The CCW meeting of high contracting parties has failed as a forum for change because its consensus decision-making process has created a roadblock to progress. Therefore, states need to consider other forums, including the First Committee, in which to take up the issue. We urge states at this meeting to raise awareness of the human cost of incendiary weapons and the need to improve international protections for civilians, call for and convene dedicated discussions of the humanitarian consequences of incendiary weapons and the inadequacy of existing international law, and work to create stronger standards to close loopholes in international law and further stigmatize the use of incendiary weapons. A complete ban on incendiary weapons would have the greatest humanitarian benefits. For more information, please see our new publication, Incendiary Weapons, Need for Stronger Law and a New Forum, co-published by Human Rights Watch and Harvard Law School's International Human Rights Clinic. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Human Rights Watch for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Control Arms.
Thank you, Chair. I'm honored to speak today on behalf of Control Arms. a global coalition that works to prevent the human suffering caused by poorly regulated arms transfers. Since last year's first committee, conflict in Gaza, Myanmar, Sudan and Ukraine have continued unabated for most of the year, and new conflicts and tensions started or intensified in other areas of the world. According to the Peace Research Institute Oslo, in 2024 there were 61 active state-based conflicts across 36 countries, the highest number recorded since 1946. In parallel, the world has witnessed a general distrust in and a decreased engagement from multilateral instruments. This brought some states to withdraw or express the intention to withdraw selectively from international instruments such as the International Criminal Court, the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention, and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. Civilians are the ones who suffer the most from armed violence and the indiscriminate use of arms and ammunition in conflict. According to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in 2024, civilian deaths in conflict rose 40%. Further, OHCHR reports that every 12 minutes a civilian dies in armed conflict. Control Arms works to promote the universalization and effective implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty, a treaty that aims to improve the regulation of the international trade in conventional arms. Articles 6 and 7 of the ATT provide a clear framework for states to prevent transfers of arms, ammunition, and parts and components that could be used in the commission of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and that can contribute to commit or facilitate serious violations of IHL and human rights. This August, the ATT Conference of State Parties welcomed a working paper on strengthening youth participation in the ATT. It encouraged states parties and other stakeholders to consider youth perspectives in the work of the ATT and to explore measures to strengthen the meaningful participation, engagement, and leadership of young people in ATT-related efforts. Yet, what response can we provide to these young people who see that atrocities are committed in conflict areas around the world? To the numbers of young people that have taken to the streets to protest against the transfers of weapons to Israel? To those seeing war military expenditure rising to US $2.7 trillion in 2024, the highest level ever recorded, with increases in all geographical regions of the world? We believe that rigorous implementation of Articles 6 and 7 of the ATT can provide a response. Only effective implementation and compliance with these articles can contribute to achieve the object and purpose of the treaty, help reduce human suffering, and leave to young generations and our children a legacy to be proud of. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the representative of Control Arms for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of International Campaign to Ban Landmines.
Thank you, Chairperson. The Mine Ban Treaty remains a shining example of humanitarian disarmament, a groundbreaking instrument that for the first time banned a conventional weapon and set a precedent for future disarmament instruments. Today, 80% of the world's nations are on board. We warmly welcome Marshall Islands and Tonga this year. Over its 25-year history, the treaty has stigmatized anti-personnel landmines globally, created a strong framework for their total eradication, and upheld the rights and dignity of landmine victims and survivors. Some 30 states parties have become mine-free to date. Tens of millions of stockpiled mines have been destroyed, and risk education and assistance to victims are provided at levels unimaginable before this treaty. Delegates, these hard-won gains are now under grave threat. Since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia, anti-personnel mines have been used on a massive scale not seen in decades. And last year, for the first time since 1997, the United States transferred anti-personnel mines to state party Ukraine. Meanwhile, the government forces of Myanmar have expanded their mine use, causing widespread casualties and displacement. We are deeply concerned by new use reported in Iran and North Korea and saddened by reports of new mine use along the Cambodia-Thai border, where we urge both governments to clarify the situation and swiftly clear any remaining contamination. This year, the treaty has been shaken further by the recent notification of withdrawal by 5 European countries: Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The ICBL condemns these short-sighted, shameful decisions and urges states to reverse course and not to engage in production of these appalling primitive weapons. Even more alarming, however, is Ukraine's unilateral decision to suspend its obligations under the Mine Ban Convention. This action is not permitted under the treaty. This could set a very dangerous precedent, allowing to pause humanitarian obligations in wartime. Is this what you want? The ICBL calls on Ukraine to immediately retract this unlawful suspension. We urge all states parties to take a clear and united stance to affirm that the suspension is impermissible and incompatible with the treaty. Silence or inaction would risk legitimizing a precedent that could unravel decades of humanitarian progress and provide a path for halting government obligations under disarmament and IHL treaties. We call on all states to condemn any use of anti-personnel mines by anyone under any circumstances. Our full version's online. Thank you.
I thank the representative of International Campaign to Ban Landmines for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
Distinguished delegates, 80 years ago this August, 2 nuclear weapons, considered small by today's standards, obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing more than 250,000 people. 2 months later, a new international organization was born to, quote, save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, with nuclear disarmament among its paramount objectives. Today, the risk of a recurrence of the atrocities of August 1945 is perhaps as great as it has ever been. Last year alone, the 9 nuclear-armed states squandered more than $100 billion enhancing and expanding their nuclear forces, as documented in ICAN's annual nuclear weapons spending report. None is currently pursuing nuclear disarmament in good faith, as legally required under the NPT. Most no longer even pay lip service to the idea of a nuclear weapon-free world. It is a dire state of affairs, made even worse by the prospect of artificial intelligence being integrated into early warning and command, control, and communication systems. In challenging times like these, rather than lowering expectations and tempering demands, we must pursue the total elimination of nuclear weapons with even greater ambition. It is worth recalling that historically some of the greatest breakthroughs in this field have emerged out of crisis, but it depends on you. You're seizing this moment to advance what you know to be necessary instead of settling for what you think to be possible. As many delegations have noted, against an otherwise bleak backdrop, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons stands out as a beacon of hope. As of last month, a majority of the world's nations are either parties or signatories to this landmark accord. ICAN takes this opportunity to congratulate Ghana on its ratification and Kyrgyzstan on its signature. At a time when multilateralism and international law face extraordinary challenge, adhering to and implementing the TPNW is the strongest action a state can take to reject nuclear weapons, to advance the law and norms of nuclear disarmament, and to act as a further guardrail against nuclear proliferation. Today, ICAN appeals for all states, including those that possess or claim protection from nuclear weapons, to join this treaty without delay. The first review conference of the TPNW, to be held in November 2026 under the presidency of South Africa, would be one milestone to work toward. As South Africa has proven, disarmament can be achieved when there is political will to do so, and doing so reduces enmity and mistrust in others. Maintaining nuclear weapons, conversely, undermines international law, human rights, environmental sustainability, indeed, most every principle that the UN stands for. 80 years ago, our forebears rose from the ashes of tragedy to create this institution. Now we must do what we know is necessary to fulfill its potential, to eliminate nuclear weapons, and to safeguard our survival as a species. Thank you.
I thank the representative of International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons for his statement. I give the floor to distinguished representative of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy.
Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, I thank you for this opportunity. The International Court of Justice, in its 1996 advisory opinion, affirmed that the threat or use of nuclear weapons would generally be contrary to the principles and rules of international humanitarian law, in particular the principles of distinction, proportionality, and unnecessary suffering. The court also affirmed that there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiation leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. This obligation, restated in Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is not aspirational. It is legally binding. Yet, instead of progress, we see new generations of warheads, delivery systems, and doctrines that expand the role of nuclear weapons in national security strategies. Such actions not only breach the spirit and letter of Article 6, they erode the very foundation of collective security that the UN Charter demands. Nuclear risk today is being reshaped by technological acceleration and emerging technologies. Developments in artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, hypersonic delivery systems, and autonomous weapons are eroding human oversight and compressing decision timelines. These unregulated risks heighten the probability of nuclear use by accident or miscalculation. It is therefore imperative that human judgment and control is preserved at every step. Excellencies, the 80th anniversary of the United Nations coincides with the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Events that testify that no use of nuclear weapons could ever comply with international humanitarian law, given their indiscriminate effects and catastrophic humanitarian consequences. With each passing year, the message of the hibakushas, or the atomic bomb survivors, only becomes louder and clearer that humanity and nuclear weapons cannot coexist. Yet, compassion and courage can. Therefore, civil society around the world cooperated for collaborative action to commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons with a joint appeal that I present to you today. This appeal, endorsed by over 1,700 organizations and individuals, calls on member states to, number one, affirm that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. 2, stand down nuclear forces and adopt policies never to initiate a nuclear war. 3, commit to eliminating nuclear weapons no later than the United Nations 100th anniversary in 2045. 4, redirect the billions spent on nuclear weapons to urgent global needs. Excellencies, as I conclude, I humbly submit the choice between elimination of nuclear weapons over annihilation by nuclear weapons is not a difficult one. Let this 80th session be remembered in humanity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, and I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Project Plowshares.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kiana Loichi, and I'm here from Project Plowshares to deliver a joint statement on outer space security. Space may seem distant, but it touches us every day, from weather forecasts to banking and global communications. Billions of people depend on satellites that knit our lives together, often invisibly. But what is invisible is also fragile. The insecurity growing on Earth is now spilling into orbit. Around the world, many states are taking steps to keep space safe and sustainable. These efforts are commendable, but without collective security, space will remain vulnerable to mistrust and potential conflict. Civil society is deeply concerned by the growing pursuit of weapons capabilities in space, including renewed interest in missile defense interceptors, long ago judged to be impractical and destabilizing. These developments is fueling an arms race no one can win, while increasing the danger of misperception and escalation. We urge states to reaffirm the core principle of the prevention of an arms race in outer space, keeping space free from weapons and armed conflict. The new open-ended working group on Paros offers a clear opportunity to advance that goal, but only if states move beyond procedural debate and focus on results. Practical steps are within reach. Establish standards for safe and predictable proximity operations, create emergency communication channels, protect space-based early warning systems linked to nuclear forces, refrain from placing or testing weapons in orbit, reinforce transparency and confidence building through information and sharing and dialogue, and ensure inclusive participation, bringing states from all regions, civil society, and industry voices. These measures would directly reduce risk, build trust, and safeguard peaceful uses of space. They are practical, achievable, and urgent. This statement was developed collaboratively with civil society experts from around the world and is endorsed by more than 10 organizations. The full version, including detailed recommendations, is available online. Space must remain a domain that benefits all of humanity, not a new arena of conflict. As Ambassador Maritza Chan reminds us, peace is possible, though it often requires 1,000 attempts. We must keep trying. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Project Plowshares for his statement. I give now the floor to distinguished representative of the Conflict and Environment Observatory.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delivering this statement on behalf of 31 organizations. The scale of environmental devastation caused by armed conflicts and military activities is accelerating humanitarian crisis, an ecological collapse in ways we can no longer afford to ignore. These vulnerabilities threaten human security and fundamental human rights, deepen vulnerability to the environmental crisis, and undermine our shared prospects for peace and sustainable development. Take, for example, the genocide in Gaza. Beyond the tens of thousands of deaths, the population is facing acute and long-term environmental health risks. Millions of tons of contaminated debris and solid waste are leading to the spread of communicable diseases, while most of Gaza's water infrastructure and agricultural areas are destroyed. Or consider the severe environmental consequences of the war in Sudan, where oil and energy facilities continue to be targeted, resulting in conflict pollution and disrupted access to electricity and water. In Ukraine, Russia's war is creating novel environmental risks, from the widespread use of drones to the unprecedented militarization of nuclear facilities. All these developments are deeply concerning. Yet environmental degradation arises also from military activities in peacetime, including weapons production and testing, as highlighted in the latest report by the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. Moreover, spiraling military expenditure diverts resources from climate finance and sustainability efforts while increasing military emissions. This is precisely why it is crucial for the First Committee to integrate environmental concerns in its deliberations. Chair, although the environment remains under-prioritized in the context of armed conflicts, this year has shown encouraging signs of progress. The ICC launched a policy initiative to advance accountability for environmental harm, while the ICJ affirmed states' obligations to protect the climate system. We also welcome the growing attention to environmental harm within the UN Security Council's Protection of Civilians agenda, as well as the increasing recognition of environmental risks related to nuclear weapons. But the First Committee must do more. We therefore urge all member states to raise concerns over the environmental dimensions of armed conflicts and militarism in national interventions, champion the PARAC principles on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict, and commit to reducing military greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing transparency of emissions reporting. Protecting the environment is a matter of civilian protection, human rights, and lasting peace and stability. The evidence is overwhelming. The tools are available. What is needed now is the political will to act for the sake of current and future generations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Conflict and Environment Observatory for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of CELS on behalf of the Torture Free Trade Network.
Distinguished Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, I stand before you today to highlight the urgent need for a global, legally binding, torture-free trade treaty. Around the world, law enforcement equipment and weapons are being used to commit acts of torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. This includes both standard equipment, such as tear gas, some types of rubber bullets and batons, as well as inherently abusive equipment, such as spiked batons, body-worn electric shock devices, and inhumane restraints. These abuses can be committed during protests, in places of detention, in the process of arrests, or in other settings, and the devastating physical and psychological impacts on survivors can be life-altering. Despite the serious human rights risks involved, the international trade in law enforcement equipment remains largely unregulated. Recent positive steps at the regional level, such as the European Union's update to its anti-torture regulation to expand its lists of prohibited and controlled goods, should inspire global action. But regional efforts alone are not sufficient. Only international cooperation and enforceable global norms can end this shameful trade. There is growing momentum to establish international standards. The Alliance for Torture-Free Trade, which includes over 60 states, has pledged to act collectively to stop the trade in goods used for torture. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN Special Rapporteurs, and regional organizations have stated their support for torture-free trade. The Special Rapporteur on Torture's 2023 thematic study made a compelling case for a legally binding treaty. Notably, in June this year, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, the Committee Against Torture, and the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture, among others, called for an international legal instrument regulating the global trade in law enforcement equipment to help stamp out torture and other ill treatment, protect victims, and prevent further violations. Increasingly, people across the world are making their voices heard. The civil society Torture-Free Trade Network that I represent here today is made up of over 85 organizations from around the world. More than 250,000 people have signed Amnesty International's petition demanding an end to the trade in instruments of torture. The message is loud and clear. The international community must act. There is an urgent need to begin negotiations for a legally binding torture-free trade treaty. Thank you.
I thank the representative of CELS for her statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Youth and Disarmament Education.
Thank you, Chair. I'm addressing you on behalf of 60 organizations and campaigns from around the world. Let us begin with good news. Recently, civil society advocacy and diplomatic attention have generated exciting progress in the field of youth and disarmament education. Youth have had opportunities to address this and many other disarmament bodies. This week, the first ever UN Youth for Disarmament Forum met here in this very building. This shows us that change is possible and these spaces can become more inclusive. Of course, disarmament education is not just a youth thing. Disarmament education spans across generations. Educators foster critical thinking, ethical awareness about militarization, and help all people, young and old, understand international frameworks. However, we also feel despair. Our lives are threatened by some of the highest levels of armed violence since the founding of the United Nations. Many of us also face genocide, climate catastrophe, easy access to small arms, growing inequality, online radicalization, and digital dehumanization. We fear growing autonomy in weapon systems and increasing nuclear instability. States use these very conditions as excuses to avoid making progress on disarmament. Educational institutions also rarely change this inertia. youth participation is also limited by intersections of gender, race, class, indigeneity, disability, national origin, and sexuality. Funding for disarmament and youth participation is minuscule compared to record military expenditure diverted from social services vital to our futures. Meanwhile, our right to protest these threats are under profound attack. Thus, we call on you to support and strengthen the First Committee Youth Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Resolution, make statements drawing linkages between youth, disarmament, education, and other pressing issues such as climate action, human rights, and sustainable development. Support platforms for freedom of speech, scientific inquiry, and reliable information. Builds peace in areas of intensive armed violence, protecting young people through disarmament and ending the diversion of resources from other crucial priorities. Yes, young people are the future, but we are also here now. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pace University for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Open Nuclear Network.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished representatives, the erosion of information integrity in the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear domain remains a pressing concern. We witness continued disputes over confirmed chemical weapons attacks, in direct contradiction to the findings of independent and internationally mandated investigations. We have seen the spread of false accusations of biological weapons programs designed to stoke fear, spread panic, and sow mistrust between states. We have also observed the deliberate promotion of radiological and nuclear falsehoods intended to also stoke fear, cast doubts on non-proliferation commitments, and undermine confidence in nuclear safety. Distinguished representatives, in our interconnected information environment, such campaigns exploit vulnerabilities in our global communication ecosystem, undermining not only the integrity of facts, but also the stability of collective security arrangements. Disinformation erodes confidence in disarmament and multilateral institutions and the treaties that underpin international security, especially the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Addressing this challenge requires reaffirming our collective commitment to truth, transparency, and verification. These are the norms and mechanisms that underpin the United Nations disarmament architecture. To support this architecture, the Global Partnership's Counter WMD Disinformation Initiative has produced a series of concrete tools. Our most recent tool is an interactive resource that tracks how disinformation is shaping our multilateral disarmament debates. In this committee, in the Security Council, in the Chemical Weapons Convention, and in the Biological Weapons Convention, we see disinformation shaping debates, and we are tracking this with our tool. And so this coming Monday, on the 20th of October, we're actually launching the CBRN Disinformation Tracker on the margins of this meeting, and you're all invited to attend. Registration details are available on the UNLDA meeting pages. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Open Nuclear Network for his statement. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Quasac Nuclear Frontline Coalition.
Your Excellency, Honorable Chair Masari, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and fellow civil society representatives, we, youth leaders from across the globe, convened through the inaugural Youthful Disarmament Forum, are deeply honored to deliver a youth-led statement on emerging technologies to this committee. This statement, endorsed by more than 55 individuals and organizations, represents not only the perspectives of youth, but also those of historically marginalized and underrepresented voices that are systematically excluded from multilateral decision-making processes. Humanity is confronting unprecedented and interconnected polycrises. We are witnessing climate emergencies, wars, and profound geopolitical shifts that exacerbate global inequalities. Central to these challenges is the rapid advancement and weaponization of emerging technologies. While these technologies have immense potential to support sustainable development, their entanglement with nuclear and conventional weapons represents an existential threat.
Emerging technologies human rights, sustainability, equity, justice, and ethics. The application of AI systems to nuclear weapons should be halted. The acceleration of AI development places enormous demands on water, energy, mineral resources, creating environmental risks that directly threaten the achievement of the SDGs. At the same time, the concentration of technological power within a few corporations further risks perpetuating digital colonialism, where economic benefits are extracted from sensitive regions without justice or reciprocal value. Populations, particularly youth from the global majority, are placed in vulnerable situations and face systemic exclusion from decision-making on technologies that would shape their futures. Youth have a unique role to play in addressing these converging challenges. Building on the discussions and the outcome document from the Youth for Disarmament Forum, we urge the committee to institutionalize purposeful youth participation, invest in youth capacity building and education, and structure multi-stakeholder engagement to bridge policy and technical communities.
The extended submitted version of this statement. Our commitment is clear. Youth are not passive stakeholders, but active partners, ready to co-create governance frameworks that safeguard peace, protect rights, and foster equitable access to the benefits of technological advancement. Thank you for your attention.
I thank you both for your statement, Quasi Nuclear Frontline Coalition and United Network of Young Peace Builders. I give now the floor to the Distinguished Representative of International Humanitarian Law and Youth Initiative.
Thank you, Chair. I deliver this statement on behalf of members of the International Humanitarian Law and Youth Initiative. IHLYI is a grassroots youth-led initiative bringing together young professionals and international law practitioners from 16 countries across the Global South. Most of our members come from communities directly affected by armed conflicts, which shapes our understanding of humanitarian challenges on the ground. Our focus is documentation, advocacy, and legal awareness, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, where the application of IHL remains most critical. IHLYI has established itself as a credible and dynamic platform for advancing disarmament, humanitarian norms, and inclusive peace building globally. Mr. Chair, we support all the statements delivered today by civil society addressing the challenges that hinder the effective implementation of international legal instruments, particularly those related to IHL, the protection of civilians, and sustainable peace. Among these pressing challenges is the use of naval mines and improvised maritime explosive devices, which in recent years have reemerged as serious threats to international peace, security, maritime safety, and the environment. Although naval mines are not new weapons, their deployment today in congested sea lanes and strategic waterways creates unprecedented risks for civilians, shipping, global trade, and marine ecosystems. According to the latest GICHD report on underwater explosive ordnance, Yemen has recorded the highest number of incidents in the past decade, around 78 cases related to naval mines, with 142 mines washed ashore since 2017. Most of these mines, locally manufactured types, were designed to disrupt ports and vital maritime routes, causing severe environmental contamination and restricting fishing and trade in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In Ukraine, several drifting naval mines were detected this year near the coast of Odessa. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean Sea and Gulf of Oman, 2025 witnessed explosions affecting oil tankers, reportedly caused by limpet mines, highlighting the evolving and persistent nature of this threat, even outside active conflict zones. For example, in July 2025, the Villamora oil tanker flying the Marshall Islands flag suffered an explosion off the Libyan coast, with security sources indicating that a limpet mine was the likely cause. The humanitarian and environmental consequences of these practices are grave. They kill civilians, destroy critical infrastructure, pollute marine ecosystems, and undermine prospects of economic recovery and maritime development. Unlike landmines, which are addressed under the 1997 Ottawa Convention, naval mines remain outside of comprehensive and modern international regulatory framework. Mr. Chair, The IHOI emphasizes the urgent need for coordinated international action, and we call upon member states to renew their commitment to IHL and maritime law and encourage the First Committee to integrate humanitarian and environmental dimensions of naval mines into its deliberation on disarmament, peace, and security, particularly in views of emerging risks in Red Sea. Support the development of clear international standards governing the responsible use of naval mines, enhance cooperation with youth initiatives by involving them in the thematic discussions, and promote transparency and accountability among all actor states. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the representative of International Humanitarian Law and Youth Initiative for his statement. Distinguished delegates, we have heard the last NGO statement. I will now give the floor to delegations wishing to contribute to the discussion or to make any comments in response to the civil society representatives here today. Kindly press the microphone button to join the list of speakers. The first speaker I see on the list is the Israel. I give the floor to the representative of Israel, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a brief reaction to the statement heard by the Speaker on behalf of the Conflict and Environment Observatory. I'd just like to state that Israel is a nation strongly committed to security, peace, and the rule of law. It upholds international law and conforms with its obligations, including in the face of relentless attacks in spite of the most complex conditions. This is in contrast to terrorist groups that abide to no law or moral standards, them and their patrons. We will continue to exert our right and duty to defend our population, hoping for a different future where terrorists do not put the security of the region at risk. Chair, I take this opportunity and turn to the Speaker and wonder if she has any concern or compassion in light of the disturbing images coming out of Gaza over the course of the last few days, showing Hamas executing masses of Gazans, innocent Gazans, following the Israeli withdrawal. I wonder if this is a matter of concern to the Speaker and her organization. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel for his statement. I see no further requests for the floor. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the representatives of the non-governmental organizations who participated in today's interactive discussion for the informative presentation and contribution to the international debate on these crucial disarmament issues. The committee will now resume its formal meeting.